All right.
Okay.
So let's start with some breathing meditation, just to calm and focus the mind and get it ready for this session. And then, as always, visualize Buddha Shakyamuni in the space in front of you. Appearing as a fully ordained monk. As a manifestation of all enlightened qualities and inseparable from your Lama. He's surrounded by all the Lalanda masters, of India, by other great Indian masters, as well as by realized masters of Tibet. And also those of other Buddhist traditions. Guiding and inspiring us. And even if they don't really appear to your mind, just feel their presence in the space in front of you. And then visualize that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. Seated around you wherever there's space. Appearing in their different forms. Yet all of them experiencing suffering of samsara. Suffering, having this contaminated mind and body. While also having the potential to become fully enlightened. And then open your heart towards all of them. based in particular on the understanding that the actual nature of their mind is completely pure. And then generate affectionate love towards all of them. A heartfelt affection, care, and closeness to each one of them. No matter how difficult, how annoying they may come across. And then paying more attention towards their different sufferings. Just because they have a mind and body that was caused by afflictions and karma. And while focused on all their suffering experiences, generate great compassion. This deep and heartfelt aspiration that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes. And even more so, wishes out of deep affection that may I be able to protect them from their suffering and its causes. And this aspiration then grows stronger and turns into a real determination to do whatever is necessary to take on the responsibility to work towards liberating all sentient beings from suffering and its causes. Yet, since this is realistically only possible once we become enlightened, once we've attained the qualities of a Buddha, let's generate the aspiration to become fully enlightened, to be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. And think that it's also with this motivation to become a Buddha for the benefit of others that we continue to study Chandrakirti's entering into the middle way. And then without letting go of our motivation, let's take refuge and generate bodhicitta once again by reciting the prayer. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And in order to deepen our love and care for sentient beings who are surrounding us, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then directed at the visualization of the great beings in the space in front of us, reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay, thank you. Well, you may have heard me talk about a handout that I prepared for this class. Well, I didn't prepare it specifically for this class. I prepared it a few years ago. It's on the 37 Factors of Enlightenment. First, I thought I'd just briefly mention them and not give you much details on them, but actually, as part of the different types of emptiness that are described here, the 20 types of emptiness, and then of course, kind of classified in different ways, and therefore far more extensive than just the 20 types. There are the 37 factors to enlightenment. And usually when we do the traditional study, the Geshe studies, or, well, even without someone taking the degree, but the traditional study, in particular in the Gelug tradition, you study about the 37 aspects of enlightenment as part of the study of the Abhisamaya Alamkara, which usually precedes the study of this text called the Abhisamaya Alamkara. Sometimes this study is also described as the study of Parchin or the study of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Well, that comes first, and it's then followed by the study of Madhyamika, or the middle way, based on the text we're studying right now. So usually when you go through these 20 types of emptiness, everyone knows what the 37 factors of enlightenment are. Now, they're considered to be extremely important, as Wholeness mentions them again and again. And in fact, some years ago, His Holiness was asked to teach about these 37 factors, and there wasn't enough time, as it usually His Holiness doesn't teach as long as he used to. But I prepared a handout at that time, actually, and I found it again today. And I thought it was gone, but I found it again. So that's the handout I sent to Dalit. And I thought it's easiest to go through this. It's actually nothing I wrote. It's rather taken from Gyaltsabje's commentary on these 37. Very good explanation in there. Some explanation by Lama Tsongkhapa from his Golden Rosary, but it's mainly based on Gyaltsabje's explanation. Anyway, before we do this, just a brief summary of what we've done so far, the 20 types of emptiness. They're, of course, about emptiness, very important. Emptiness is the major aspect here. But before we can understand the emptiness of something, we need to understand the thing itself. Oh, I totally forgot. Everything else, I'm so busy. I'm so absorbed in this handout. I forgot to talk about what you're supposed to do next week. My apologies for that. I won't answer questions today because I want to cover this, but I want to at least talk about what I would like you to do for this coming week. So my apologies for having to stop what I said earlier. And well, it will continue with the mental factor that we spoke of last week. I would like you to continue with the altruistic attitude, as it's called, the special altruistic attitude, which is the determined version of great compassion. So it's not just the aspiration, but the determination to do whatever is necessary to be of benefit to all sentient beings. Now, you know everything about this mind. I don't think I need to add much to it. It's difficult to apply, of course, but we need to be specifically, for this week, I want you to be specifically aware of one of its main counterforces, that which really keeps us from being able to effectively generate this altruistic attitude, this determination to do whatever we can to work towards liberating sentient beings, or help sentient beings to liberate themselves from suffering and its causes. And that is, well, anger, resentment, dislike. So anger, aversion, I mean, oftentimes those are used interchangeably. Aversion, we don't like someone, there's a sense of aversion. Resentment, like even just a sense of dislike. That is the greatest obstacle. And we need to be really careful. And I think especially at this day and age, so I want to stress this, because, well, considering the situation right now, especially the war that's going on right now, we're very likely to generate this sense of towards those decision makers, the sense of dislike. And I mean, we just have these crazy thoughts, or well, maybe they're not that crazy, but just thoughts of like dislike towards those who cause so much suffering. And we have to be really careful, because to be effective, to generate this mind effectively, it's like one person. If we have this sense just towards one person, it becomes an obstacle to, well, eventually focusing on our practice of the mind of enlightenment. But even for practicing this altruistic attitude, it's an obstacle. It usually stays with us anyway, this kind of resentment. It comes and then we let it go, and then it comes again and it comes again. And yeah, it's there, and it's oftentimes there a lot more often than the mind, here in this case, of the altruistic attitude. It pops up. Well, we hear the news, there's some trigger, and it may not be the situation of the war. Of course, there are other people, maybe neighbors, maybe colleagues, maybe members of our family. So this mind is so disruptive. It's so harmful. It destroys our sense of happiness, peace of mind, and joy. Definitely. It doesn't take long for those to be gone, but it's also one of the greatest obstacles towards generating these altruistic types of mind, in this case, the special altruistic attitude. So please watch out. And in particular, if whoever is the person you feel a resentment towards, if it happens to be, well, let's say the decision makers, well, to be aware of the actual nature of their mind and realize that, of course, they're harming themselves a lot more than they harm others. In the long term, they'll experience incredible suffering due to that. So that was definitely a reason to have compassion. And that doesn't mean we condone their actions. These are still despicable. They're still actions that we don't approve of in any way, but we don't let go of our care for that person. So I think it's extremely important to watch our mind, apply mindfulness, and make sure that this mind, that we try and catch it in the act and gently let it go. Okay. All right. So this is for this coming week. But of course, I'm not saying we should not have incredible compassion also for those beings who greatly suffer right now. But that is easy. I don't need to say that. It's just as important. It's important for all sentient beings. The focus is always on all sentient beings, so make sure no one is left out. Okay, great. As you notice, I'm also not answering questions. I'll do that in the next time. But yeah, so as I said, I'm going through the 37 practices. But before we do that, there's a few other things I want to say. First, quickly remind you, we talked about the emptiness of many different factors. Inner phenomena in this case, the sense faculties, outer phenomena, the outer physical world, the outer objects, inner and outer objects, the sense organs, the coarser sense organs. So it's just a very unusual way of dividing phenomena, but never mind. So it mainly refers to the physical objects. Then there's the emptiness of emptiness itself. So we talk about emptiness, but of course here, the first three, the emptiness of the inner, it's the emptiness of inner phenomena, emptiness of outer phenomena, and emptiness of inner and outer phenomena. The emptiness we discussed, but of course the basis based on which we're talking of emptiness, we need to understand, of course, these objects, because understanding they're merely labeled on the basis of their parts. Well, what are those parts? What do they refer to? Therefore, to fully understand these types of emptiness, we need to understand the spaces. And then, so you have the first three types of emptiness: emptiness of the inner, of the outer, and that which is both inner and outer. Then you have emptiness of emptiness, very important. Emptiness itself lacks inherent existence. Then emptiness of all-pervasive space, that is everywhere. Emptiness of the ultimate, that refers to the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, this pure quality, most important quality, if you like, of the Buddha, the Dharmakaya. Then the emptiness of that which is impermanent, conditioned phenomena, the emptiness of that which is permanent. And of course they overlap. I mean, the ultimate is permanent, great immensity is impermanent, emptiness is permanent. So, but just seen from the factor of everything, just impermanence and permanence, or conditioned phenomena and unconditioned phenomena, understanding they lack inherent existence. So those are emptiness number 7 and 8. Then number 9, emptiness of that which is beyond extremes. Again, emptiness, it describes emptiness again, emptiness itself, but this time from the point of view of being free from the extreme of nihilism and free from the extreme of reification. So the emptiness of that middle way, that which is beyond extreme, that itself also lacks inherent existence. So the emptiness of that which is beyond extremes. Then the emptiness of that which is beginningless and endless, samsara. In general, there's no beginning and no end, in the sense that there's no end to sentient beings. So in general, we can say there is no end to samsara just because sentient beings are endless. Of course, there's an end to each of our individual samsara. But so there's this view, we discussed it before, that there's no end to sentient beings, therefore samsara is endless. Then there's the emptiness of that which is not to be discarded, which refers to the universal vehicle, the vehicle that leads towards the state of enlightenment, or the practices that leads towards the state of enlightenment, the Mahayana or universal vehicle. Then the practices of that which is the intrinsic nature. Again, the emptiness of emptiness, really this intrinsic nature here refers to the ultimate nature of all phenomena, and it's intrinsic in that it has always been there. So not intrinsic as the object to be negated here as emptiness, but rather the nature of all phenomena, the ultimate nature of all phenomena. From that point of view, seeing emptiness from that point of view and saying, well, that also lacks inherent existence. And then emptiness, the next emptiness is the emptiness of all phenomena. In general, all phenomena. Of course, everything that was said before, all these were phenomena, but just seeing it in general, all phenomena. And then number 14, which is the most extensive, is the emptiness of defining characteristics. So, of course, defining characteristics are extremely important, simply because if we talk about phenomena being merely labeled, well, that which is labeled is, for instance, the mind, and it's labeled on the basis of its, well, defining characteristic, its parts, its basis of imputation. And that includes the defining, the kind of unique characteristics that this object has. But even these defining characteristics, of course, they lack inherent existence. And therefore, it's the emptiness of these defining characteristics. And Chandrakirti explains those by way of how many verses altogether? 201 to 215, so 15 verses basically, 14 and a half verses. So it's a very extensive explanation of the defining characteristics. And this explanation of defining characteristics, he subdivides it into the basis, the grounds, as they're also called, the grounds, the path, and the result. So Buddhism in itself can be explained through the basis, the path, and the result. And well, first, there are 3 verses that describe the defining characteristics of the basis. So here, Chandrakirti cites as the basis the 5 aggregates, the 18 elements, and the 12 sense sources or sense fields, as they're called. Also described, of course, in the Heart Sutra, for instance. And of course, these 20 types of emptiness and their basis, they are set forth in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So no surprise that you have in the Heart Sutra, for instance, the emptiness of the 5 aggregates described, of the 18 elements, and of the 12 sense sources. So here they're also mentioned, all of them, with their defining characteristics. And then, of course, we're taught that these defining characteristics, and of course that which they define, they lack inherent existence. Okay, so we went through this last time. We don't need to repeat it. We don't need to go over that again. And then the next verses, from verse 205 to 209, Chandrakirti presents the emptiness of the defining characteristics of the path. Now, what is the path that he sets forth here? He sets forth the 6 perfections, then he mentions the 37 factors to enlightenment, and the 3 doors to liberation. The 3 doors to liberation we won't go through today. Oh, sorry, the 6 perfections, and then he adds the absorptions and Immeasurables, I forgot to mention those, so as path. And again, they're defining characteristics, stressing, of course, that they lack inherent existence. Then the 37 factors, and lastly, the 3 doors to liberation, as they're called. Now, I briefly went through the 6 perfections, and I believe most of you are familiar with them. So what I would like to go through today are first, just briefly talk about these absorptions that Chandrakirti mentions here in verse 207, meditative absorptions and the immeasurables. And then in verse 208, the first 2 lines, is it the first 2 lines? Yeah. You have the 37 factors mentioned, but they're just mentioned. And as I said in the beginning, I said they're so important, and now you have this handout, so might as well just go through it so that you have some sense of what they refer to, especially in the context of the Mahayana. And as I said earlier on, as Formless mentions them again and again, and in a lot of teachings they're mentioned, but because they're quite extensive, it's difficult to cover them in each teaching. And that's why I'd like to cover them here. All right, so if you look at verse 207, so before I present to you this handout, which will be shown, but let's maybe just quickly go to verse 207. So the verse starts with meditative absorptions and the immeasurables. So I'll just read it for now. So meditative absorptions and the immeasurables. Oh, there it is. Likewise, the absorptions of the formless states, the knower of perfect truth. So the Buddha said these are characterized by unperturbed serenity. Okay. So, of course, those lack inherent existence, but what are they? These meditative absorptions, there are specific types, and they're considered to be important to understand them, and they're not that difficult. You've probably heard of them anyway. There's said to be 8 meditative absorptions. So our mind, after it has generated, so ordinarily we're in the desire realm, we all know that, we live in this world where our lives are governed by a certain type of desire, very strong type of desire. And very much, it's in control of our lives. But this desire is also a sign that our mind is not very focused, is not very concentrated. But our mind still has the ability to be very focused, to be very concentrated. And so there are certain levels of concentration that we can all train ourselves in that are extremely beneficial, definitely beneficial in terms of dealing with this desire that is so much part of our mind. And the first type of concentration that you're also all familiar with and that I will mention here is calm abiding. But it's not one of the meditative absorptions, as they're called here. It's one of the steps towards meditative absorption. So a meditative absorption is a very concentrated state of mind that is even more concentrated than meditative absorption. And that is such, and here there are 8 types. So the first type is such that the afflictive emotions in particular, and here it's really the desire that is typical for our existence, for the desire realm, that is temporarily eliminated. So as long as you have that deep type of concentration, it's such a concentration, it's really characterized by the fact that this level of concentration stops the manifestation, the arising of our ordinary desire. It cannot arise. You're so focused, you can still act and, go about stuff. I mean, while you're absorbed in this concentrated state, of course, you won't be able to talk or anything. You're so focused. Your mind is so focused. But when you rise from that without losing this absorption, then from that moment onwards, from the moment you have this meditative absorption, desire, as is part of our desire realm, is gone. Only for as long as you have this absorption. And that is called the meditative absorption of the first form of the form realm, the first meditative absorption of the form realm. And then you have a second absorption, a third, and a fourth. So there are 4 levels of meditative absorption that pertain to the form realm. We live in the desire realm, but there's also a state within samsara called the form realm. It's not like our ordinary desire realm. It's quite different. I cannot tell you what it's like. It's a celestial kind of realm. But beings who are born there have one of those 4 states of meditative absorption. So as I said, the first level is characterized by the fact that your mind is so focused that desire, in particular desire of the desire realm, that is typical for the desire realm, can no longer manifest. Instead, now, the desire that arises in your continuum is typical for that form realm. It's much subtler. But after you've attained the first absorption, then you can continue to generate the second absorption, which is characterized by not only having eliminated temporarily, as long as you have this absorption, so having eliminated the desire of the desire realm, but also that of the first form realm, the first level of the form realm. So now the desire that manifests is even subtler. And then the third level, even subtler, right? And so you go all the way to the 4th level. I mean, it's hard to put it into words, but it's just the desire becomes subtler and subtler and subtler. The mind is so focused, but you still come out of this absorption. You can do things. And when you die in this lifetime, depending on which of those 4 is the highest, you're reborn there. So if you've attained all 4, you're reborn in the highest level of the form realm. It has 4 levels. If you've only attained the first one, you'll be reborn in the first level. And if you practice the Dharma, I mean, it's highly beneficial. I mean, having that level of concentration and be able to practice, etc. So those are realms of existence that exist just as our desire realm. And as you've heard so far, our world here, our world, the way we perceive it is really just a reflection of our own mind. It's a result of our karmic imprints. We have these appearances to the mind, appearing to the mind. And that is because of the karma we've accumulated. And therefore, it's not surprising that occupying the same space, there are also other states of realities perceived by beings having the concordant karmic propensities or mind, really, created by the karma, that created as a result of the karma they've accumulated in the past. So the first absorption, the first form realm, the second form realm, or the first level of the form realm, the second level of the form realm, all the way to the 4th level of the form realm. And the beings who live in those, they were born there as a result of the meditative absorption, these different meditative or their respective meditative absorptions. So as I said, only the first meditative absorption, you're reborn in the first level of the form realm. If you've attained the first 2, you're born in the second level of the form realm, all the way to the 4th. But our mind can do even more. So it seems like the 4th of these meditative absorptions, that is so incredible. But you can even go further. There are 4 more levels after you've attained those meditative absorptions of the form realm. There are 4 higher levels where your mind can become even more focused. So this is the most focused that you can get without totally eliminating afflictive emotions through the either the Hinayana path or the Mahayana path. But just within samsara, that's possible. Our mind is able to keep its samsaric quality, to remain in samsara, but still attain these really high levels of concentration. So the next 4 that follow from the 4 absorptions of the form realm are the 4 absorptions of the formless realm, where when you attain the first of them, called infinite space, you're not reborn in any kind of physical realm, because it's a formless realm. So it's a state of existence where you have no body, where you perceive no physical objects, but your mind remains in a certain state due to the absorption you have attained. And it doesn't sound very attractive, but I haven't mentioned that it comes along with an incredible well-being. Initially, there's great bliss, that even that bliss eventually subsides, because bliss can actually, the type of bliss you experience because of a meditative absorption, it can actually be an obstacle to your concentration. So it is not a blissful state, but it's definitely a very peaceful state, an extremely peaceful state caused by this concentration. Of course, the peace of liberation is much greater, but within samsara, this is the most peaceful that it gets, the most peaceful it gets. Anyway, you see this kind of development where you go from the first 4 absorptions of the form realm, then you proceed to the 4 absorptions of the formless realm. And again, the name infinite space is actually, by the way, given because of your object of concentration. It doesn't have to be that object, but this is like the mind. If you practice it as infinite space being your object, well, you focus on this infinite space as your object and just be single-pointedly absorbed on that. You start off, of course, with an absorption that pertains to the 4th form realm, and that mind then grows more focused and more concentrated until it becomes a meditative absorption of the first level of the formless realm. And on that level, you've eliminated the desire that is typical for the 4th level of the form realm. And instead, now what manifests is even more subtle desire of the first level of the formless realm, called infinite space. And then as you continue, you reach the next level, the level of infinite consciousness. That is the next meditative absorption. And as a result of that, you're reborn. You can be reborn. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but you can be reborn in the level of infinite consciousness. If you continue, then the next absorption is described as the absorption of nothingness. So nothingness. And the last absorption, the 8th one, is called the absorption that is the peak of samsara. This is the most concentrated, the deepest level of absorption, the highest state of mind you can reach within samsara. So on each level, you overcome the desire that is typical for the previous realm and attain a deeper level until you reach the 8th meditative absorption. So 4 that are associated with the form realm and 4 that are associated with the formless realm. And as I said, you can be reborn there. What I meant was, if you reach, for instance, the first meditative absorption of the formless realm, you're not necessarily reborn in the corresponding formless realm, because you may actually attain also the 2nd level within this life, and instead then you're reborn in the 2nd level of the formless realm. Now, we discuss this, actually, why this is discussed. We learn about this. Just like spend a few months on this particular topic, and this was just the course outline of it. There's a lot more to it, just to understand what our mind is capable of doing, the level of concentration it can actually reach. And it's not seen as something we should work towards. I mean, the absorptions, yes, we will eventually all of them attain. We will. Our mind actualizing its fullest potential, we will all gain them, but we will not have to strive towards them in order to be reborn in these form or formless realms. But there are beings who are born in those realms. In particular, in India, this was very common practice, generating these absorptions. Before the time of the Buddha, during the time of the Buddha, of course, acknowledged their existence. I mean, he taught about them, but he didn't teach them as a desirable state, because he taught nirvana, like a state even beyond them and even further, Buddhahood. But there were many spiritual systems that we also study usually, where practitioners work towards this state. Anyway, so they're mentioned here. And like I said, as part of our practice towards enlightenment, we train ourselves in these absorptions and eventually attain them as part of our Buddhist practice. And so they lack inherent existence, of course, however great they may be, however helpful they are as part of our practice, still they lack inherent existence. And then the author also mentions the immeasurables. The immeasurables, well, they're based on at least the 4 meditative absorptions associated with the form realm, but they're also based on the absorptions of the formless realm. So based on those different absorptions, having love, compassion, or immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. Those are the 4 immeasurables. They're also, we think of them when we say the prayer, they are just expressing that the drive of that mind, wishing for immeasurable sentient beings, or all sentient beings, to be free from suffering, to be happy, and so forth. But of course, those are actually states of mind. Here in this context, they're described as states of minds that wish for all sentient beings to be, or at least for immeasurable sentient beings, for many, many sentient beings to be happy, to be free from suffering. But not just that, they're very focused. There are these absorptions. So the mind, it's these absorptions that arise in the form of the immeasurables. Okay, I think that should be enough. So it is these meditative absorptions, the 8 that I described, 4 of the form realm, 4 of the formless realm, and the immeasurables. Likewise, the absorptions of the formless states. The meditative absorptions. The first meditative absorption here refers to those of the form realm. So the meditative absorptions of the form realm and the 4 immeasurables, as well, or likewise the absorptions of the formless states. So the knower of perfect truth knows, where is it? I'm trying to find it in a commentary. So the knower of truth, the Buddha, said that these are characterized by unperturbed serenity. That is the absence of disequilibrium, because they're attained through the abandonment of the mind not being in that state of equilibrium, that state of focus. So in other words, you have these meditative absorptions, you have the immeasurables, you have these meditative absorptions of the formless realms. So those are completely focused states of mind. But of course, they also lack inherent existence. They're also merely labeled on the basis, well, definitely on the basis of their sub-moments that they're made of. Based on those, we label these different types of consciousness. All right. So that was just a brief explanation of the 4 meditative absorptions of the form realm, the 4 immeasurables, and the 4 meditative absorptions of the formless realm. And now follows, as said in the next verse, the 37 factors that lead to enlightenment. So what is the nature of the 37 factors? They lead to enlightenment. Their nature is to decisively drive forth from samsara. It's just those 2 lines, so there's not much explanation given. So as before, with the meditative absorptions and the immeasurables, their defining characteristics are mentioned, characterized by unperturbed serenity. Okay, so those are the defining characteristics, and those lack inherent existence, of course, especially these defining characteristics. And then next, you have the 37 factors. They lead to enlightenment. Their nature is decisively drive forth from samsara. So it's the 37 factors of enlightenment. But actually, these 37 factors, it sounds like when we hear the word enlightenment, well, they're a Mahayana practice. But no, actually, they're not. They're a practice that is common to the what do you call it, the fundamental vehicle, the vehicle that leads to liberation, as well as to the universal vehicle, so the vehicle that leads to enlightenment. These practices are common to both. So let's see what they are. Now, first I just wrote them out. So the 4 applications of mindfulness, the 4 right abandonments, the 4 supports, and so forth. So without reading all of them, let's start with the first type, the 4 applications of mindfulness. Okay, so if you scroll, we can scroll up the handout a little bit. The 4, yeah, just go all the way to the 4 applications. Just, yeah, okay, great. All right, so you have the 4 applications, first of the body, feelings, the mind, and phenomena. Here, I described it as application. You can call it the 4 close placements of mindfulness or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, whichever you want to call it. You find that, of course, in the Theravada tradition, the same terminology is used. They're basically described in the same way. Well, there's some slight differences. Let's put it that way. So there's some differences according to these 2 traditions. They're a little bit different. But here you see the meaning that is given is a path consciousness. So it's actually, in this context, the way it is described here, they're from the point of view of the Mahayana path. But this is not saying that the 4 applications of mindfulness are a Mahayana path. But what I need to stress here, that this explanation that is given here is according to the Prajnaparamita Sutras, where what they mainly talk about is the path to enlightenment. And as part of that, the Bodhisattva path. And here they describe these applications from the point of view of being a Mahayana path, from the point of view of being a Bodhisattva path. But of course, implied by that is that you generate them even before you generate the Bodhisattva path. These are all qualities of the mind. These are types of awareness that we need also to become, that we need to generate to become liberated, as well as to becoming a Buddha. Okay, so mindfulness of the body, of feelings, of the mind, and of phenomena. So how is it defined? It's a mental factor of either mindfulness or wisdom that observes a body, feeling, mind, or phenomena, and examines it by way of its specific or general characteristics. Okay, so it seems a little bit different from how we think of it usually, just being merely focused on the body. Well, it also includes that, of course, being focused on the body, but focusing on the body, as an example, it refers to also examining the specific or general characteristics. I mean, by way of observation, observing, getting to know the body better. How does it work? What are its unique characteristics or specific characteristics? What are its general characteristics? So I'm not going to read the next part. It just describes, Lama Tsongkhapa in his Golden Rosary, he describes what the body refers to. So any physical aspects. So you can read it on your own. Then you have, of course, feelings, you have mind, and you have all phenomena that are other than physical. I mean, the body, they're not feelings and mind. So all other phenomena are included in that. So being aware of them. But being aware means specifically that we observe these objects. So with concentration, we focus on those. So for instance, Gyaltsabje then explains it. So don't worry about not being able to read everything. Well, if you scroll down a little bit, there it says, so there it says, the 4 types of application of mindfulness thoroughly analyze those characteristics, the specific and general ones, with wisdom and focus on them again and again with mindfulness. So that's also quite important. We start off with focus, just observing them. Then through observation, we start examining. So think of your own body as an example, and it applies, of course, to all 4 of them, to focus on them over and over again, applying focus, concentration, and then starting to notice certain characteristics, examining them, and then deepening that understanding again with mindfulness, with a level of concentration and mindfulness. So in that way, you have both aspects, wisdom and mindfulness, being at play here. And Gyaltsab very beautifully explains how these 4 refer actually to the 4 Noble Truths. Now, there's something about the 4 Noble Truths, especially I've noticed this in the West with Western students. If the topic of any kind of teaching is emptiness, or maybe the subtle energies of the body, everyone is interested. Great, very interested. But when it's about the 4 Noble Truths, it's like, I've heard it so many times. I know the 4 Noble Truths. But the problem is, if you really knew the 4 Noble Truths, you would know the whole Dharma, the entire Buddha Dharma, because the whole Buddha Dharma is in some way relates to the 4 Noble Truths. It refers, the whole Buddha Dharma is the 4 Noble Truths. There's nothing that goes beyond the 4 Noble Truths. It's the framework of the entire Buddhist teachings. And therefore, any practice we do relates in one way or another to the 4 Noble Truths. And therefore, it's so important never to discard a teaching on the 4 Noble Truths. A teaching on the 4 Noble Truths is a teaching on the Dharma, and a teaching on the Dharma is a teaching on the 4 Noble Truths. Always. So, okay, there's a certain way of explaining the 4 Noble Truths to a beginner, and that we don't want to hear this over and over again. Well, there is something to think of. But in a way, our understanding of the Dharma deepens every time we deal with the 4 Noble Truths anyway. So we should never have that attitude, 4 Noble Truths, that's just for beginners. No, that is a total misunderstanding. Anyway, I think Gyaltsab here very beautifully explains how those applications of mindfulness, feeling, body, and so forth apply to the 4 truths, for instance. So he says, for instance, in the last part of this page, when applying mindfulness to the body, we engage in meditation on true suffering. Since we come to understand that the body is in the nature of pervasive conditioned suffering, and thus generate the wish to be free from the body. Okay. Our mind, of course, is also in the nature of suffering, but having this body in particular, I mentioned this some time ago, that having this body, it creates trouble all the time. And we have to really make an effort to avoid the suffering of hunger and thirst and of having aches and pains. Just because if we don't move, if we don't do anything, there'll be pain, there'll be aching, we'll be hungry, we'll be thirsty, we start smelling, we have to poo and pee. And it's all like, these are all things that are not pleasant and the nature of suffering. Well, yeah, basically they are, or they're smelly, they're disgusting, etc. Not something that we desire, and we have to make an effort to avoid what our body gives rise to. So that's why we say the body is in the nature of suffering. If we just leave it as it is, we will suffer. If we leave it as it is, we'll grow hungry, we grow thirsty. It's painful. Just watch your own body. You need to move a little bit, otherwise pain starts. We cannot just lie there. It starts smelling. Yeah, we have to really make an effort. We have to wash it all the time. It itself just creates smelly substances that, can potentially make us sick. Therefore, it's associated with true suffering. And if we go to the next page, through applying mindfulness to feelings, we engage in meditation on the true origin, because we come to see that feelings give rise to craving and hence generate the wish to eliminate craving. Feeling in the 12 links, it's described as, well, that which gives rise to craving, and then in the stronger version, grasping, which then gives rise to the ripening of karma and so forth. Now, of course, we know that the root of samsara is not craving. It's actually the grasping at the self, but that right away gives rise to craving, to desire, to craving. We call it craving or desire. I don't think there's a difference between them. There are different words in Tibetan, ducha and sepa, but my understanding is they're the same. I've never really seen them defined differently. So desire, craving, gives rise to craving first to the I and then to everything else. And I'm not just talking about the desire realm. The desire realm craving is the strongest. But in the formless realm, there's craving. Even in the peak of samsara, even when you reach that mind, the subtlest of the 8 meditative absorptions, there's always craving. Craving never leaves us. Anger is no longer there. Anger is gone. When you generate these absorptions, at some point, anger no longer arises. But craving will always be with us until we overcome samsara. The last moment, the mind, just before we become liberated, in that mind, craving has not been eliminated yet. And before our mind is absorbed in the mind that realizes emptiness directly, there's just a last moment before liberation. Well, before that, craving can still arise. That is a very subtle, that can be a very subtle affliction that always is with us. So feeling is that which gives rise to craving, but of course we don't blame feeling for it. That is just the trigger. So here we need to watch our feeling. Of course, self-grasping is the actual cause, but in the meantime, we also need to be aware of feeling, and therefore here's described in connection to the origin of suffering. And when applying mindfulness to the mind, we engage in meditation on true cessation. Since we come to realize, that's the next passage now, when applying mindfulness to the mind, we engage in meditation on true cessation. Since we come to realize that being without a self, the mind is generated and ceases in each moment. Okay, the mind is generated, the impermanence of the mind becomes obvious. Thereby, we will lose our fear of the absence of a self and generate the wish to actualize true cessations. It makes sense. If we understand the mind better, we come to see its impermanence, coming and going and coming and going, and that there really isn't any self, right? It helps us to understand that the self, there's no self is needed. The mind just does its own thing. It doesn't need a controller there. That's just a projection by the mind itself. In actuality, that's our mind has that idea that there is actually a self, but the mind is just doing its own things. Different minds working with one another, one mind replacing the next, and so forth, constantly changing. And of course, once we attain we have fear of the absence of a self initially when our mind starts thinking about the absence of self. So because it's like, well, what about the controller of the mind? There was never a controller, so no need to be fearful of it. The mind will continue on, no problem. The mind will continue. It keeps changing. It does its thing. And then once we understand that the self was never there, well, that's the true cessation. And then the next paragraph, when applying mindfulness to phenomena, we engage in meditation on the true path, because we come to realize that thoroughly afflicted phenomena, true sufferings and true origins, are to be abandoned, whereas completely pure phenomena, true cessations and true path, are to be relied upon. Thus, we will generate the wish to meditate on true path. Okay, so this is just saying here phenomena, like that is not feeling, that is not mind, that is not a body, just from the point of view of the true path, true suffering and true origins, true origin of suffering, and then true cessations and true path, just in general, seeing those, focusing on those, well, that helps us then to avoid true sufferings and true origins, and instead cultivate true cessations and true path. So focusing in particular on phenomena from the point of view of being afflicted and non-afflicted. And that's what the path is all about. What is the path? What does it mean to practice? I mean, the path, of course, refers to a practicing mind that is driven, here in this case, by the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. When our mind is driven by that aspiration, by bodhicitta, we call it a path consciousness. But in actuality, it's a practicing mind, as long as someone is still a bodhisattva. And so really practice, what does practice refer to? Avoiding some things and generating and cultivating something else. All right, so that's just in the relation to the Four Noble Truths. I think that's a very beautiful explanation Gyaltsab gives here to apply to those four that are, of course, important to anyone on the path to liberation as well as on the path to enlightenment. And then the next passage I'd like to read, and then the rest I'll leave out and I continue to the next of the 37 factors. But the next passage, it says that why is the body first, and then feeling, and then the mind, and then the self and phenomena. So it says here, the reason for observing the body first is that childish beings is just another way of saying ordinary beings whose mind is not affected by the Dharma. So they're like children, we're like children because we act like children. Is that child or not? Well, actually sometimes worse than children. So childish, of course, something different than being a child, but childish as in like, yeah, well, we all know what that means in a silly kind of way, driven by our afflictions. They think the body is an entity that serves as the abode of the self, the vessel of the self. Feelings are enjoyed by the self. The mind is an entity that is the self. So we have a sense like if any of those four were the self, it would be the mind. Sometimes it's separate from the mind and sometimes it is the self. So we're kind of undecided. And phenomena are the basis of a thoroughly afflicted self and a completely pure self. Okay, so that's how we look at the world. So this idea here, the mind is an entity that is the self, that seems to be in contradiction to early on saying that the mind is associated, or mindfulness of the mind is associated with true cessations, the fear of losing the self. But our mind, it's like sometimes our sense of a self keeps changing anyway. It's not always the same. It's not consistent. Sometimes there's a sense it's a totally separate self. Sometimes there's a sense the mind is the self. I am my anger, and so forth. And so here it's more talking about the mind being the entity that is the self. So if we have to decide of those, body is the vessel, feelings are enjoyed by the self, the mind is the self itself, and phenomena are the basis of a thoroughly afflicted self. So a self that is faulty, that has a faulty type of self, and a completely pure self. So we would look at a Buddha as having a completely pure self. Of course, we also hold on to the selflessness, the self. We also hold on to the self of a Buddha. We perceive a Buddha as having an inherent self, as an example of a completely pure self. Okay, so these are the four types of mindfulness. Then, based on those, of course, the order in which those are given. So these are the four types of mindfulness, and then come the four right abandonments, which follow. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll have I won't read the rest. You can read this on your own, at your own time. Maybe it's possible to make this available. Actually, you can find this, you can download it. The private office put it on the website of His Holiness. So if you look at the 37 Factors of Enlightenment, if you take the title that is here at the top, and you Google it and you go at Dalai Lama archive or something, you'll find that handout. So we don't need to even post it. So next are the four right abandonments. The four right abandonments usually there's not really an order, or like a sequence. First, the 4 types of mindfulness, and then the 4 right abandonments. But here they're presented as some kind of sequence, saying that once you've become mindful in the way explained before, then you start to practice, become mindfulness of the 4 noble truths as described earlier. Well, then you practice, you start to abandon that which needs to be abandoned and adopt or increase virtue. I mean, abandon non-virtue and increase virtue. So this is really, our whole practice is really about this. So right abandonment, the 4 right abandonments, is right abandonment that abandons a non-virtue that has arisen. Right abandonment that does not give rise to a non-virtue that has not yet arisen. You're all familiar with that. I mean, abandonment can also mean to reduce. Okay, so of non-virtues already there. We weren't able to avoid it to arise. Anger is there, but then we make an effort, gently make an effort for it to go away. Secondly, abandonment has not arisen, giving rise to non-virtue has not yet arisen. That has not yet arisen. So we know I'm going to be angry in a moment, but I make an effort for that anger not to arise. Then right abandonment that increases a virtue that has arisen. All right, so we have love and compassion in our mind, and we want to cultivate that further. We want to increase it. And then there's right abandonment that gives rise to a virtue that has not yet arisen. We have no love and compassion towards a particular person in our mind, for example, and we work towards it arising. So this is how much I can do today. There won't be enough time to do more. I hope it's helpful. I'm not sure it is, but like I said, in order to describe the different types of emptiness, well, the emptiness of what? The 4 types of mindfulness, without understanding them, how can we meditate on the emptiness of them? And I'll go through all of them. And like I said, you find those online. We can maybe also, I've emailed it to Dalit. Maybe Dalit can send it on to some of you, whose ever email address. Oh, there it is. Oh, there, Snee just put it there. There's the link. You can just download it from there. Yes. Well, thank you, Snee. So just go there and download it. It's in a PDF file. Unfortunately, I could not find, because I don't have all my hard drives with me. They're still in my cloud, so I couldn't find the Word file. And as I went through it today, I found there was a full stop missing, and there was a bracket sometime randomly kind of appeared. And there are probably other mistakes that I haven't noticed, so I couldn't correct them. But anyway, I don't think they will bother you. Anyway, please read them on your own. You'll become more familiar with these types of mind. I think Gyaltsab does a beautiful job explaining them, and then we'll go through them together. Next time we'll finish them, I'm sure, and in that way develop a sense of what the 37 Factors of Enlightenment are all about. But of course, what I want to meditate on today, I don't want to meditate on them per se. I'd like to meditate on their emptiness, of course. So let's not forget. And I'm just saying it before we start to meditate. So the mindfulness of the body, it's just moments. It's made up of moments in time. So if you think, you focus on the specific characteristics. It's not like that each moment of that mind is the same. It's going from this characteristic to that characteristic to the next one, the specific one or the unique ones, the more general ones of the body, for instance. So kind of sweeping through your body, if you like, or intellectually examining these characteristics, examining them through observation or through learning about them, and then applying analytical meditation. So in both cases, you have mindfulness of the body, even through this analysis. So it's a little bit different from the way it's sometimes described in the Theravada tradition. In this Tibetan tradition in particular, they speak of it, or well, the Nalanda tradition, they speak of mindfulness as not just the mind being focused, but also this analysis, applying mindfulness and analysis. And here in the case of the body, to the body. But let's not forget, it's merely labeled. Those are just different moments, and none of those moments are mindfulness of the body. Because one tiny moment, you're not examining anything. One moment cannot examine. To examine, you need a continuum of different moments, right? So continuum of moments, it's a little bit like, to give you another example, walking, right? One moment of walking, lifting your leg. That's not walking. You need a continuum of moments, moving your leg, moving it forward, placing it again, taking the next step, all these different moments. Based on those moments, we label walking. Consciousness is the same. Mindfulness must be a continuum. Mindfulness here that examines and focuses on these characteristics. None of those moments are mindfulness. It's their continuum. So there we see how we can focus on emptiness, and we'll do this together. All right, in the way I just said. And then, of course, again, with the right abandonment. What does the right abandonment refer to? Notice a non-virtue that has arisen. Okay, so now applying the antidotes. That takes some time. Once you apply the antidote, you have to have the motivation to apply the antidote. Then the antidote is applied until the non-virtue is gone. What do you call that continuum of mind? Right abandonment that abandons a non-virtue that has arisen. Okay, abandon, and I need to stress this again, doesn't mean that you've totally abandoned it. Just temporarily you got rid of it. And of course, one thing I totally forgot to say, but the right abandonments, we didn't get that far. It's effort that takes delight in doing so, right? Wow, I love doing this. This is something that should inspire us, not just to make, but whoa, great, there's this anger, let's kick it out, kind of thing. All right, great. So having said all this, let's now focus, let's now meditate on the lack of inherent existence of the 4 mindfulnesses and the 4 right abandonments. Okay, but we'll start as always, we'll start with focusing the mind, concentrating the mind with a few moments of mindfulness on the breath. So Chandrakirti teaches us that there are absorptions, there are immeasurables, the different meditative absorptions of the form and the formless realm. Those merely exist conventionally. As they're just labeled. So explicitly, he teaches their emptiness. Dependence on many moments of awareness that is single-pointedly focused and does no longer allow the arisal of certain desire or craving associated with the desire realm and so forth, we label meditative absorption of the first form realm, or the second form realm, and so forth. None of them exist from their own side, but rather the coming together of different moments that have certain defining characteristics. We label the meditative absorptions. And then with regard to the 37 factors of enlightenment, taking first the 4 applications of mindfulness. Neither these types of mindfulness nor their defining characteristics exist in and of themselves. Since they're merely designated. For instance, the application of mindfulness that focuses on the body it can only exist as a continuum of different moments of awareness. But the individual moments of awareness not having the defining characteristic of being in an application of mindfulness. Since such a mind examines the general and specific characteristics of the body, with such examination consisting of many different moments, examining this and that and something else. Therefore, we label mindfulness of the body. Many individual moments focused on different aspects. Without that type of mind existing above or beyond, being just labeled. And the same applies to the other three types of mindfulness. Mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of phenomena. These are all consisting of numerous moments focusing on different aspects. And based on the continuum of all these moments, we then label mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of the mind, or mindfulness of phenomena. And likewise, the next four of the 37 factors are the four right abandonments. And again, those are merely labeled on continuums, continua of moments of awareness, with none of these moments qualifying to be any of those right abandonments. For instance, the right abandonment that abandons or temporarily gets rid of a non-virtue that has arisen, Well, initially, there are moments of awareness that notice that a non-virtue, such as anger, has arisen. Giving rise to the motivation to apply an antidote to that anger, which is followed by applying, for instance, the antidote of love through generating love itself. Towards the object of anger. Until the anger has subsided. And the mind being aware of now the absence of anger. So while these individual moments are not qualified to be called a right abandonment, that abandons the non-virtue which has arisen, based on that continuum of different mental events, we label right abandonment that abandons a non-virtue which has arisen. Yet beyond being merely labeled, just not findable. Not among its many moments of awareness, nor separate from them. Therefore, this type of right abandonment, as well as the other three types, lack inherent existence. That is, I do not exist beyond being merely labeled by our or others' thoughts or conceptual awareness. Conceptual mind that labels. And now to conclude this short analysis, let's focus for a few moments single-pointedly on whatever insight that we've gained through this analysis, and single-pointedly focus on it and allow for it to sink deeper into our mind. To sink deeper on a more onto a more emotional level. And then let's dedicate the positive potential we accumulated, in particular, learning about the first of the 37 factors, but also through meditating on their emptiness. May this become a cause for us to quickly eliminate a misapprehension of reality and replace it with a pure wisdom that realizes all phenomena as they really are, so that we quickly attain the fully enlightened state of a Buddha for the benefit of each and every sentient being. And in order to be able to effectively do so for the sake of all sentient beings, may our kind spiritual lamas, our spiritual masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, have an extremely long and healthy life, so that they continue to teach us through their example and through their words. And always guide us until we ourselves become fully enlightened. But may our virtue also help those beings around us to find more happiness and inner peace, and especially those who are sick, like Geshe Punsok, Tali Lubin, and Nurit Cohen. May they very soon overcome their illness and swiftly recover. And of course, may those who are responsible for the war right now, may they develop awareness of the suffering that they cause and generate love and compassion and wisdom, so that the war will soon have an end. And peace will once again be in that region. And then, of course, let's dedicate through the words of Shantideva. Let's further dedicate our virtue. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. All right, thank you very much. And just to remind you for this coming week, we continue with the practice of the altruistic attitude, determination to do whatever we can to work towards the welfare of sentient beings. And I haven't mentioned bodhicitta, but just because I didn't mention it doesn't mean you shouldn't, again, generate this mind over and over again. But for this week in particular, watch out for any kind of dislike, resentment, etc. And don't allow that to fester, but instead apply the antidote. So apply the right abandonment that abandons a non-virtue that has arisen, okay, in that way, so that you can continue with the practice of altruistic attitude in the most effective way. All right.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Geshe.
Have a lovely week.
Thank you.
See you next week. And please read the material in advance. It may be helpful for a better understanding, the handouts on the 37 factors. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laila.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Good night. Thank you, Dharma.
Good night, Dalit. Thank you.
Bye-bye.